Okay, alrighty, everybody. I guess we're live. We're here. Another webinar for us at Bruce Clay Inc. It's so awesome to be here. Obviously, we're going to be waiting a few minutes before everybody kind of jumps in. There's going to be a lot of people attending this webinar, so we're just going to give it a few more minutes. I'm Dylan Vibert. I'm here with Bruce Clay himself, the man. So how you doing, Bruce?
Doing good.
Good. We're also joined here by one of our engineers, Mike Terry. He's one of our guys here that's more on the technical side of things. So he's been kind of lurking in the background, helping us out with any questions that may come up in the future. But for now, just hello, Mike. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, hi there. Glad to be
here. Awesome. So before we get started, we're just going to give it a few more minutes before everybody kind of starts jumping in. People kind of show up late. But if you're here with us, just tell us where you're at. Yeah, it'd be fun to kind of see where everyone's kind of coming in from. Have a lot of people joining us from all different parts of the world. We're here in Southern California, Simi Valley specifically. So it gets kind of hot out here in the summer, but can't complain. It's beautiful California. So obviously we got a few people here. Well, we got somebody from India. That's awesome. Las Vegas. Oh yeah, I love Vegas. Good stuff. We got some people here from Florida and Georgia. Oh, yes, love these places. I'm in South Alabama, Gulf Shores, the beach. Ooh, I'm jealous. Kind of went to the beach this last weekend. It was gorgeous out there. Tampa, Florida, from the UK. Wow, love it. I love when we see all these people from all different likes of the world. It's just so awesome that we have the technology for everyone to can join in one central area. It's great. People from the UK. We got people from Louisiana. That's awesome. The Bronx. Ooh, very cool. Got Florida again. All over hot, sunny Bulgaria. Wow. It's always interesting. We're always trying to find that one spot. Like, we've never had anybody from there quite yet. But, some of these places are like, oh, yeah, very familiar. And Bruce has, obviously been all over the world. So he might know some people that have kind of been in some of the international offices that he's kind of visited. We got Liberty Lake, Washington, Los Angeles, Texas again, Orange County, Las Vegas again, Boston. Hey, Cody, wow, it just keeps going. Turkey, Sacramento, Portland. So as you can see, it just keeps going. We got so many of these people. It's great. It's so awesome to have everybody here. Again, this list just keeps going and going, but it's awesome to have everybody here with us. So, all right, I think what we're going to do is jump into this a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. And just a quick introduction again, my name is Dylan Vibert. I'm the senior producer here at Bruce Clay Inc. I'm involved in all of our video productions, and that's basically what I do here for the company. And in case you were wondering who I am and why I'm speaking in this conference, because obviously I know you guys all came here to hear Bruce speak, but he asked that I come on and kick us off by starting to talk about something that we may all have in common with SEO. Now, we know that Google is constantly changing their algorithms, and it's difficult to keep up. And what you're probably doing now is doing lots of keyword research, linking, adding cool looking graphics, testimonials, etc. But it still isn't working. And it's not getting you in that top spot. And that can be very, very frustrating. And I imagine for most of us, our websites are the main gateway for customers to find our business. So if they can't find you on the web, it can be pretty detrimental to your bottom line. And what a lot of people who do SEO don't realize is that we're all still learning. I'm still learning, Bruce is still learning, Mike's still learning. We're all in the same boat here. So it should probably give you some ease to know that if you are struggling with this, it's not just you, we're all struggling with this together. So the point we're trying to make here is that unless you want to start paying a bunch of money that you probably don't have to start ranking at the top as a Google ad, you're just going to be burning through cash constantly just to rank there at the top, you're just going to need to figure out how to better do this organically. Now, how do we do that? Well, that leads us to today's presentation with Bruce. One of the big changes from Google recently that everybody's talking about is the page experience update. It's a big change that is composed of multiple components, and the biggest area of focus in this update is to your core web vitals. We'll talk a little bit about what those are. So what Bruce is going to share with you is the 3 expert tips to improve your core web vitals, along with other useful information for the page experience update. Now, you notice that we said expert tips because Bruce is in fact an expert. I've known the man for many years now, and he knows what he's talking about. Right, Bruce? You know what you're talking about, right?
I make a point of it.
He tries his best. No, but in case you're still wondering if this is indeed true, I'll just give you a quick backstory on Bruce. He started the company in 1996. That was before Google even existed. And it has since grown into a company that is now on over 5 different continents. He's trained thousands and thousands of students all across the globe for decades, and he's been a key presenter at major search conferences like SMX and Affiliate Summit. He's won multiple awards and is considered the father of SEO if you actually search for that term. Literally, if you type in father of SEO, Bruce is what comes up. It's pretty incredible. Now, obviously, you're probably thinking, I work for him. He's paid me to say all this. And although that is indeed true, it doesn't negate anything I've said. He's an SEO expert that has been in the business longer than most any other SEO specialist out there. And that experience is unmatched in this industry. So before I turn it over to him, I just want to emphasize that receiving these 3 tips from Bruce is going to be the first step in improving your site's rankings. Now, I want to be clear. I said this is going to be the first step because, spoiler alert, you're not going to leave this webinar and suddenly have all the tricks and secrets to know what it takes to be in that top spot. You're just not. That's not how this works. So what we're going to be doing at the end of this is talking about a new membership program that's going to offer you access to tons of SEO training resources from Bruce. And after that, we're going to be taking some questions at the end from any of you. This is the fun part. We do a bit of Q&A. As you can see, there's a little chat box in the bottom. Some of you have already kind of typed in where you're from. There's also a Q&A box. I'm going to do my best to kind of navigate through those. So that's going to be kind of the format of today's presentation. So we'll get to all of that later on soon. But first, I'm going to hand it over to Bruce, and he's going to give you those 3 expert tips. Bruce, it's all yours, buddy.
Thank you. Clearly, there's a lot of things going on in this space. I'm fond of saying that every Monday it's a new industry. Google changes things, your competition changes, you change your own website. It's a new industry every Monday. But one of the biggest topics lately is fundamentally, it's referred to as page experience. And within that, you have Core Web Vitals, and they are very technical material. That's very technical material. So I'm going to be covering that. It's predominantly an educational presentation. It's a webinar. The meat of it is going to bring you up to speed on what that is. But one of the things that I think is important is that we understand how this is all coming together and what it's going to look like. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a sort of a warning. Google warned us a year ago, over a year ago, that this was coming. And they had defined it, and a year in advance, things change. So I'm going to explain during the presentation today where the things have changed. But I think that a lot of companies don't understand the significance of what we're dealing with. For instance, Google has indicated that when the dial is turned up on the Core Web Vitals in particular, that they don't expect to see a very significant change in rankings and impact to companies. That's what they're saying. And you would expect Google to actually say that. It makes sense. And surveys that have been out there have indicated only 4 to 6% of all websites are Core Web Vitals ready. What I want to do is give you a warning. The people that paid attention to Core Web Vitals are probably the websites that used to rank already. They're the sites that can't afford to give up traffic. So the top 20, the top 30 out of a million certainly are in that 4%. So we're dealing with a modification to the ranking algorithm where variables are going to contribute to your ability to rank, where everybody in the top 20 is doing it, perhaps except you. And that's why we're having the webinar. The fundamental thing is, if I am number 1, even if I only drop to number 4, I've lost maybe 80% of my traffic. Based on click-through rates, 80% of my traffic will have gone away if all I did is slide a couple positions. And you can trust that if these variables are in fact in the algorithm, and we all know how Google does it, there's a dial and they say, okay, volume is 1, volume is 2, and they keep turning it up. They're going to be turning it up up until August. That's what they've said. It'll fully roll out and be implemented in August. So for the next 10 weeks, we're going to see one click on the dial, and it's going to become more and more and more significant. And we're probably going to see people who haven't touched it start to decay. And I don't want any of you that are listening to the webinar to suddenly say, what happened to my rankings? Simply because you didn't pay attention to the core web vitals. You're going to have to pay attention. This is going to be important. This is a survival tactic. If you don't do it, and you happen to be in the top of the first page right now, understand, if you don't do it, you may have a near-death experience. And I don't want to be the CMO or head of SEO when the president walks in and said, what happened to my traffic? And you say, I just didn't get around to doing core web vitals. That would be a mistake. So what we're going to do in this presentation is we're going to go over core web vitals. And we have some very specific tips that'll help you. And in fact, the topic is 3 expert tips, and we'll probably give you more than that. And in fact, I have more than that. Now, to explain the whole thing, the page experience update has more than just core web vitals. You have to be mobile friendly. Got it. The spider has switched. Folks, we are on a mobile spider. It doesn't matter what you do on the desktop. If that mobile spider doesn't see it, you lose. Safe browsing. You have to be safe. Malware is a problem. Secured, HTTPS. Yep. We have now moved over to where if you're not secured, it actually harms you. It used to be way back when that HTTPS, because you had to buy a certificate, install it on your server, it was a pain in the butt, but it was really for e-commerce people who accepted credit cards. Now it's for everybody. You have to be secured. That's the way it is. And if you're not, it actually hurts you. The intrusive interstitials is that little pop-up that you see sometimes on a site that says, what's your zip code? Do you want a free coupon? Come back and join our blog. Those kinds of things, if they pop up too soon, Google considers it annoying, and actually it can harm your rankings. Later on, I'll mention you're going to want to delay those probably 15, 20 seconds. We advise either 20 seconds or on exit. The focus of today are the top 3 areas here. Core web vitals. Now, you have the largest contentful paint. I'll talk about it. First input delay. I'm going to be talking about that. And we're going to talk about cumulative layout shift. That is predominantly what we're going to need to understand. Now, all of these have been fully described in an ebook. So take this, understand it. By the way, I have a set of these slides as a PDF. We're going to be distributing those at the same time as we distribute to you the link to the replay of this video. So you'll be able to get all these things. But if you look for the Google Page Experience update on our website, use our search, you'll be able to find it. We have a full 30-some page ebook on what it's all about. And I think that you're going to want to do that. So what are we talking about? We have those 3 different categories. Now, I want to make sure you understand that the page experience, the categories at the bottom, HTTPS and mobile, those kinds of categories have been around for quite some time. What Google is indicating is they're going to turn up the dial. They're going to become more important. It was for a long time that Mobilegeddon, and this is from years ago. Oh my goodness, the mobile spider is the only spider. Well, Google couldn't really implement that because too many people weren't mobile friendly. Well, they just gave everybody a warning. Be mobile friendly or don't expect to rank. So the existing categories that you see here, mobile and safe browsing, HTTPS and interstitials, those kinds of things, those are not new. We have known about them for a very long time. And as SEOs, we should have already fixed them. And in my particular case, I think that from virtually everybody we talk to, and I'm talking about training classes and conferences and presentations, almost everybody, they're up on this. It's the top part that isn't. And as I said, a survey, which isn't really surveying people, but actually spidering websites, has indicated only 4 to 6% of all websites are ready. So we're going to get in, we're going to start talking about what they are. Now, these are signals. Now, according to Google, they're in the algorithm, but the algorithm is multi-layer. It's really complex. It isn't, just one spot. You go, you're either on or off. It's scale, and it's not binary. It's a scale. And so what we want to do is be as good as we can within each of them. And those are going to be the important vital signs that we're going to care about. And as we get into it, all of these categories, and you can see it on the screen, how fast, how responsive, right? Do you jump around in the middle of this? All of these things are going to really matter when you get into doing the Core Web Vitals. Now, one of the things that has changed over time, originally Google said, in order to get a boost for rankings, and Google said this, boost for rankings, in order to get a boost for rankings, you have to pass all 3 of the Core Web Vitals. If you only do 1 or 2, you're not going to get a boost. Then Google changed it. They are separate boosts. So if you do a very nice job on LCP, but you don't have the others, you still get a little bit of a boost because that is a separate item. So understand, these are now separately contributing to your ability to rank. And when you look at your competitors, if they're doing all 3 right and you're doing 1 right, you lose. You're going to see sites leapfrog others in the search results as a result of this. Now, it'll be slow, because if they're turning the dial up like normal, today it's on 1, then it's on 2, then it's on 3. You may not see somebody leapfrog you until it's a 5, but it's coming. If you're not doing it, expect a near-death experience by the time it's up to an 11, if you understand that significance. So that's what we're dealing with. So LCP, Largest Contentful Paint. This is how long it takes to load basically the largest image on your site. And it is a performance issue. It measures how fast it takes, how much time it takes for that to load. Now, what we want to be able to do is load everything fast, really fast. But if you're waiting for that to happen because you have to load an entire web page, I've got a tip for you on how to solve that problem. It turns out that this is significant. Now, not everybody has this as a big problem, but if you have a great big hero banner at the top of the page or really complex art, and it takes a while, you're not going to be in the green zone. The green zone is your largest image has to load within the first 2.5 seconds. Now, what kind of things are considered? Folks, you have video? Do you have an image? A hero banner? Background images that you're loading via CSS? Now you got to wait for the CSS to load, then you got to wait for it to, in turn, load the background image. Your content is not loading as fast as you think it is. And 2.5 seconds is not really a long time. So we have to be able to understand that we want to be able to load quickly. So understand this, that LCP designation, you have to be in the green zone. It's 2.5 seconds or less. That is considered good. Now, if it's above that, Google considers it a bad user experience. You're not going to get a boost. And I don't know if you're actually going to get harmed. but you're certainly not getting a boost. Now, according to Google, FID is an important user-centric measurement. They consider it a key part of core web vitals. You cannot ignore it. You can't. So your first input delay is critical. Now, the difference between first input delay and largest contentful paint is the content paint is how long it takes to load your largest image. The first input delay is how long it takes before somebody can interact with your web page. Many times you have people that have websites that even though there's a box or a button, it doesn't work. It has to load more of the page before there is an input. And that is measured in milliseconds. How long is it from the time the page starts loading until that particular button is active? That's basically FID. And you have to know how to do that. Now, one way around it, here's a quick tip. Don't have any buttons above the fold. I mean, you can push things down, but you really care how long it takes for somebody to be able to interact and get some kind of responsiveness from your page. So if it loads slowly, you could have a good FID if there's no buttons above the fold, etc. But if you click an element and it doesn't do anything, that is really not a good experience. And we're going to have to pay attention to that. Key presses, touches, taps, whatever you want to call it, it has to actually work. So Google recommends that it be less than 100 milliseconds. That's 0.1 seconds. That's the green zone. Now, getting into the green zone, that just takes time. You're going to have to be able to do that. And you're going to have to work on it. Now, first input delay is typically one of the easier things to accomplish. And I personally think a lot of sites automatically qualify for that. The next one is Cumulative Layout Shift. Now, I think we have all gone to sites where you see the page, you see where you're going to click, and as you go to click it, suddenly an ad appears and pushes everything down, and suddenly you click on the ad. You didn't want to click on the ad, but the ad just suddenly consumes space in the document object model. There it is. So when you clicked on the button, suddenly it's the ad you clicked on instead. That is highly annoying. And again, Google has identified only 3 categories here, and Cumulative Layout Shift is one of the page experience categories. We cannot have it do that. Now, I've got a quick little video, if you will, or a little animated image that'll show you what it is. And so I'm going to play it, hopefully right now, and you can see it. Here we go. Yes, you want to place? No, I don't yet. What? Let me show it to you again. So I am going to click, no, I don't want to order. But the shift occurred, and suddenly my click on no became an order button. This is far more annoying and in fact destructive, both for the website and for that user experience. So again, Google doesn't want to see that happen. Now, one of the interesting parts about this is that the shift does happen. It really moves around. So we're going to have to pay attention to how that works. So that's our cumulative layout shift. This is the summary. We have to be in the good category for as many of these as we can. This is what matters here. And if we can do it, then we're doing really, really well. And if we can't, then we have a problem. All right. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about how scores are derived. Now, there's multiple ways to get scores. Now, the two main ways that we can see our scores is either in field or in lab. The field is really derived usually from the numbers driven from Chrome. I mean, this is user experience. And one of the things that we have found is, as an international organization, I am finding that my page load time is not as good as I thought it was going to be. My performance isn't as good in India. Right, it's on the other side of the world. It takes longer, and that actually impacts some of my scores. So what we're finding is that the field results are for all field results. This is a real world measured quantitative piece of data that goes in and helps us. The Web Vitals extension, as shown here, which is lab, that particular area where it says lab, this is basically an emulation, a simulation of what the web would do. You're going to find as you get into, for instance, PageSpeed Insights, and you run some of these things, your lab scores could be all green, but your field scores may not, may get one green, maybe. And it's because the real world is experiencing your site a little bit slower than normal. You might need to run a CDN or two, or whatever plugins you have, or you have to consider the fact that people in slow parts of the world might be loading your web page and it's dragging down your overall scores. So we're going to have to pay attention. This is the set of things that you're going to be able to look at. Now, I will point out that Google has some very nice numbers as part of Google Analytics. And those are probably a lot more reliable, but we'll talk about how that works in a little bit. Now, one of the tips, because as I said, you're going to get 3 tips. One of the tips is that you can simplify the way your page is loaded, right? Your LCP, which is your largest image, you can do a preload, right? If you preload just the largest image and switch to your website, which is what you're seeing in this example, you load the image, then you load the page. The largest contentful paint is that fast because that's all you're loading, the largest image. Now, if that's your hero banner, that works out real well. If it's your background, you can load the background with clear. You can see that some of the background loads here ghosted. And then you hydrate it. So logically, as you want to lower your time for largest contentful paint, it is really going to be useful if you can do a preloader. Now, the other choice is you really want to make sure your images are optimized. You don't need it to be any bigger than it needs to be. And if you are doing a CDN, then that can help you with, load time worldwide. That kind of stuff really, really, really is going to come to you and help quite a bit. Now, how do I improve my CLS? Well, the first thing is you don't do anything that jumps it around. Now, a lot of the CLS is impacted by fonts. If you're dynamically loading fonts, then the font is going to be a bigger font and it moves things, or you're dynamically inserting an ad or modifying what would be in the document object model. Those are things that are really not good. You can use the tools that are specified here to determine what you need to do. And I think that's really, really, really going to be important. But your CLS score, most people think it's only for the initial load above the fold. That isn't really how it works, right? You can see here all the things you can do. But what we also need to understand is that it's in multiple locations on your page. what is the CLS score for the largest 5-second load time on your page? Now, you can hide things. You can not activate things until the fonts are loaded, and then you can show the font so it's faster, not cause things to jump around. We've done a lot of research on these kinds of factors. We've been able to optimize a great many things, but the slide you're looking at emphasizes that this is in a 5-second slot, and that 5 seconds doesn't just occur above the fold. This can happen anytime something is displayed. So you're going to have to pay a lot of attention to this. But this tip is you can hide unstable elements until they're there, and then you do it to avoid the shift. Make sure it's done right. Now, first input delay. Well, most sites don't really have a big problem with first input delay. It's only a problem if your site is so busy loading everything that the processor doesn't get the turn on, hi, I'll accept your click. That's fundamentally what's going on. So what we want to be able to do is measure it. I'd say a majority of the sites do not have a first input delay score. And in the real world numbers, remember, this is the number that comes out of the real world. In the real world numbers, you're probably going to see that that is probably your only green number. Well, everybody in the world has that as a green number, probably, or a vast majority. That's something, if it isn't green, you really need to work on it, because that places you last among equals. So you need to make sure that the ability to interact with your page is as early as you can get it. If it isn't green in real world, you're going to have to work on it. Now, the tip there is, well, first of all, you probably are green already, but don't really load the resources until there's some form of event, right? You can lazy load things, you can delay load things, you can cause things to load as a set and then it's there. So there's many things that you can do. You fundamentally need to pay attention to this. So those are the big 3 tips. However, we have bonus tips. Page speed. And I want to mention this because this is somewhat important. When you run your page speed insights report, as an example, everybody sees at the very top of the page the speed. That's the first thing you see. One of the big fallacies that people have is that that is your overall Core Web Vital score. It isn't. The Core Web Vital numbers are entirely different. This is just speed. That's all this is speed. And it is possibly, because it's been in the algorithm for a very long time, it is possibly totally independent of your other Core Web Vital numbers. There might be slight overlap. One of the things we have found is in order to move some of the Core Web Vital numbers into the green, we actually have to slow down the speed, like doing a preload of a largest image or something like that. As long as the overall is green, you're going to be okay. Now, you get a lot of recommendations, and the recommendations are from various tools. What I found is if you run, for instance, page speed, and you get your recommendations and you do them all, and you go to a different tool, it will recommend different things to be fixed. So you fix them all. And then in aggregate, your score can go up. I want to make sure everybody understands, if your speed gets to 100, it doesn't mean you're passing Core Web Vitals. It means your speed is 100. Good for you. Core Web Vitals are still things that you have to fix. Those are the things that are in the algorithm. Speed's in the algorithm, don't get me wrong. Loading fast matters, but you have to be able to get in and have speed and have core web vitals. And it is better to move the speed from 100 to 98 and turn one of the core web vitals green than to have a speed of 100. So you're going to have to work to make that happen. Just understand, speed is great. There's plugins that'll help you with speed. No doubt. We have all sorts of cool things that we've been doing to get speed up for our clients. But you got to get the speed up. It helps on all of the other things, because if you fix speed problems, Largest Contentful Paint will be a little bit better. Got it. We know we have to do that. But if you can't get the core web vitals to green, I'd sacrifice a little bit of speed. Now, track your core web vitals in Google Analytics. Page speed insights, as good as it is, and as much as it indicates where you're doing all right, you're not doing all right, lab is lab, real world is real world, worldwide. But what I would do is I would look at your Google Analytics area. That is the area you're going to pay attention to. And it just happens. You want to correlate all your information. You want to make it work as best you can. Use Google Analytics, certainly, you use page speed insights quickly. It gives you indicators. It tells you what to do. That is important. Use your page speed insights. Use your web page test. Use your tools. But at the end of the day, it's your Google Analytics numbers that are really going to help you the most. So use your Google Analytics. It's going to work the best for you. Content delivery networks. There's a lot of things out there that we have learned sort of the hard way. And one of the things that we have actually done because of the Core Web Vital research, and as was mentioned, we have Mike Terry here. He's going to be here for the Q&A part. Mike has spent most of his recent life up to his hips in Core Web Vitals mud. And one of the things that we have learned is that not all content delivery networks, especially the big ones, are giving you performance that works. What we have to do is focus on things. And one of the things we want to focus on is time to first byte. And certainly we can talk about that, but how long does it take to get something, right? We're not talking about general performance. We're talking about if your site is slow loading the first byte, which is a CDN issue, then you have a problem. Your CDN is not doing what you're paying for it to do. You have, and by the way, in many, many cases, we're finding that instead of 20 to 60 milliseconds, we're dealing with 200 milliseconds from a CDN. That's terrible. That's terrible. We have to get time to first byte, optimize it, know what is going on in countries, and figure out if I have a customer there, what percentage of the queries are there, because those are going to drag me down in my scores because that country is at best a 2G country and we're 5G here in the US. We have to understand how that works. It doesn't always, it's not regional. It's whatever you're going to get from Chrome and Lighthouse and Google Analytics. Whatever those all are, those are the things that are going to matter. So time to first byte is very important. And we actually recommend, and nobody else I think is talking about this, we actually recommend you time your CDN. You find out what the time to first byte is. And if they're too slow, you need a new CDN. We've gone through a couple. Mike actually wrote a plugin so that we can coexist with multiple CDNs. Got the time to first byte way down. So we do really well in a lot of those things. Now, we believe that the ranking is somewhat incremental. We know that on a page level, understand page, we are going to be dealing with a majority of the numbers. That this is a page-centric kind of a thing. And the page experience is by page. So when you go through this whole thing, for Core Web Vitals, you don't just test your homepage. And you don't just look at one number and say, we're okay. You have to look at each of your templates. You have to look at the kinds of pages that are getting the most traffic. Certainly start there. If you have some high traffic pages, those better be humming. Start there, make it go. This isn't really a secret, but you have to know that this is the way it's done. The page experience boost is by page. It isn't necessarily site-wide. And this matters. Now, what it means is on a page-by-page basis, this is part of the core database. This is part of Caffeine. And this is something that you're going to have to pay an awful lot of attention to. Now, I hope that what I've done is giving you some tips that you actually can find actionable. That's the goal. I want you to be able to do this. But understand, we have spent months studying this, and we have found a great many things that are common beliefs are not exactly the way they work, or the things that appear superficial are not deep enough. And you have to go deeper, and you have to try things, and you have to experiment. The reason we had a 1-year warning, the reason for the warning was because this actually takes time. A lot of this is programming skills. This is server changes. This is template changes. This is structural changes about page load and performance and sizes and image formats. And many of these items are beyond the capability of even the average web developer. Web developers, SEOs, you may not have the programming experience at a server level to fix some of this stuff. That's why we had the warning. And we learned that over time. A lot of this is programming. As I said, we actually even developed a plugin for it. If you don't develop plugins, that's okay. But this is the kind of depth that sometimes you have to go to. Now, a simple site may not be so bad. More complex sites, heavy-duty e-commerce sites, large image sites, things where you're dynamically including content and moving things around, a lot of on-the-fly fonts, dynamic content. This isn't designed really for a novice. So that's it. We're going to be impacted by this. I'm expecting it to start out insignificant until the dial is turned above a 5. When it gets to an 11, I'm going to see a whole lot of really upset people because they used the rank and they're going to wonder where 75% of their traffic went. We're going to see people that have had near-death experiences that are going to try to catch up. And this is a 1 to 2 month project. This is not a trivial project. We've done a bunch of them. We're probably faster than most. We're probably more accurate than most. We're probably able to do that. Folks, it's still a month, maybe 2 months. This is not an easy button. This is complex, so you're going to have to pay attention. As I said, we're going to have a replay of this video, the whole video, with copies of the slides, and it's going to be something that you can do. Hopefully, we've provided some level of training and knowledge for you. We've got more to talk about. I'm going to turn it back over to Dylan, and we'll go on and we'll wrap it up, and then we're going to have a Q&A session. So whatever you do, don't go away. Dylan?
Awesome. Yeah. Obviously going through that presentation, Bruce, because we've been studying the page experience update for a while now. And even when you give this presentation again, even though I've heard it a few times, it's still just kind of like, wow, man, this is going to change so many things. And it's very insightful stuff. I mean, it shouldn't be too intimidating to everybody, but it's just something where we want everybody to be prepared. And that's the interesting part about the SEO industry to me, is that it's often changing like this, where everything we've built before has to be adapted to what's currently going on. And this is a perfect example of how we are still learning. And just for context, when I first met Bruce and started working for him, I had no idea what SEO was or how to do it. And I've come a long way since then. So if you're brand new to this and you're not sure, you're in the right place. Trust me, we've all been there. But even now, having been on the ground floor for many years with Bruce, like, it's just crystal clear to me that SEO is never done. That's one of our favorite phrases at Bruce Clay Inc. SEO is never done. It's done when your competition dies. That's when it finished. So just to reiterate what Bruce has been saying, there's always something to learn, and that means you need a way to stay up to date on what is happening in the world of SEO. Now, some of you may know this, but Bruce actually held a quarterly 5-day SEO training course in Simi Valley, California. It was in person, it was live, and people would fly in from all different legs of the world to take this training course. And I've participated in it many times, had to do some recording for it. And I can't tell you how many people I would meet in the training course that they would come in and they'd say, this is their third, fourth, fifth. I think there was one guy that said he'd been there almost 10 times, which is incredible to me, which that should tell you that this is an ongoing process. And this wasn't just a couple hours, this is 5 days of training. So now, like many things over the last year, COVID kind of derailed that training experience for us. So the in-person training is on hiatus for the time being. So when this happened, Bruce came to me and he said, we need to get online, like now. So over the last year, we have produced a brand new online training program that allows you to take the course remotely and also allows you to take the course at your own pace. It's called the Bruce Clay SEO Training Program. And I'm going to share with you a little bit about it, because it's a lot more than just your standard SEO training course. No. This is a membership program that's going to give you access to tons of SEO resources at your disposal. So I'm going to go over what's in it. In the membership program, you're going to have access to a few things. You're going to have access to the entire SEO training course presented by Bruce. It's pre-recorded and broken into multiple sections that extends over 15 hours. It's a lot. It's basically the entire training course that we did in person, but we just recorded it, cut off a little bit of the fat, and just said, all right, we need to make sure that this is tight and condensed. So it's just like the in-person training course that you would get with Bruce live, but now you can view it at your own pace anywhere you want. And as you can see, there are multiple SEO topics we cover in each module. It contains multiple videos within each one of them. Again, this training course alone is 15 hours long, so you'll have plenty to learn just with this feature. Now, this is the main feature we offer in the membership program, but it's certainly not the only feature we have. So we have multiple other resources available to you once you sign up and become a member. I'm going to share with you a little bit more about them. You're going to have access to what we call mini courses, which essentially is deep dive videos. And what we do with those is we produce a particular SEO topic and we jump into the weeds a little bit more to help you understand it. We're actually, speak of the devil, we're actually right now getting ready to release a page experience update that's more in depth in this section. So that'll be something you'll want to have access to. Another resource in the program is the Ask Us Anything videos, where we answer your most SEO questions. What you do is once you become a member, you can submit the question to one of our question boxes we have on the main homepage, and then we produce a video for it. So you'll be able to access new information coming in from us on these new commonly asked questions. So you have those. Other cool features that we have are going to be you're going to have access to download ebooks. And you're also going to be able to use our SEO tools, like our WordPress plugin that helps you write better content for SEO. I believe someone asked in the chat box earlier, could you purchase the plugin? Yes, if you become a member of the program, you're able to access that plugin for free, which is an awesome resource to have. And on top of all of these things, if you sign up and become a member, you're going to be able to ask Bruce questions live. We do these monthly Q&A calls. It's similar to this webinar format where basically we tune in. It's once a month. We come on and we just have members ask us questions, anything they want. I mean, appropriate questions that are pertaining to SEO, of course, but those are going to be able to give you access directly to Bruce and be able to answer any of the questions that you have as you're going through, such as the page experience update. So as you can see, this is clearly more than just a training course that you take one time and then you're done. No, it's not how SEO works. We wanted to create a membership program that was a constant learning process that was more in tune with what the SEO industry is. You need a way to stay up to date to continue learning SEO as it changes and evolves. And that's why the Bruce Clay SEO training program is the gold standard in SEO training. You're getting tons of SEO depth on a regular basis from the father of SEO. So that's the phrase. Google it, father of SEO. He's the guy. So how do you sign up? Well, Bruce is a very forward-thinking man and somehow bought the domain SEOtraining.com. He got it years and years ago. It's very forward-thinking to me. So I don't know how you got it, Bruce, but he got it. So that's where you want to go to sign up for this program, SEOtraining.com. If you go to the website and you create an account in less than 5 minutes, you'll already have access to all of these things I just talked about. And the best of all is because you took time out of your day to be here with us, which we very much appreciate. We're going to offer you a special discount to sign up for the membership program by July 9th. If you go to SEOtraining.com right now and sign up using promo code BruceClay2021, you'll get over 16% off your purchase. That's $300 off. Again, that's promo code BruceClay2021. All one word, no spacing. But this discount is available only until July 9th, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So be sure to sign up for this today. It's a whopping $300 off your purchase. That's a good deal, folks, and there's no better person to be learning SEO from than Bruce. And like we've discussed before, for many of you, your website is your business. It's your livelihood, and improving your SEO could fundamentally change your life if you invest in long-term training. Sure, you could probably find other SEO training courses out there, but they usually are a one and done deal. They don't provide you nearly as much insight and interaction as we would at SEOtraining.com. I highly doubt they're going to be able to be as thorough and helpful to you when you need to speak to somebody directly about the page experience update. You'll want to have direct access to SEO experts like Bruce and our SEO team to help guide you through these major changes, just like this webinar. You'll have access to stuff like this as we go through, and like the monthly Q&A calls, you can ask your questions as they come in. So go to SEOtraining.com, sign up, become a member today, and invest in the long term. You need to invest in your ability to keep learning from the best in the business and how to improve your visibility online. All right? So go do that today before July 9th. Promo code BruceClay2021. Alrighty, so I think we are finished with the presentation, which means time for the fun part, Q&A. So as we've been trying to keep up in the chat box, what we're trying to do is have all the questions be filtered in the Q&A portion. So if people were kind of confused as to where that was at, if you look in the Zoom window, it's right next to the raise hand. It says Q&A. That's kind of where we want the questions to be filtered. I'm going to try and go through the chat window and see if we can, filter out some of the questions that kind of came in. Some of them were sent directly to us, the panelists you're hosting. So we're going to do our best to get through as many of them as we can. Obviously, Bruce is a very busy man, but we took time out of our day to make sure that we were going to have enough time to answer the questions as we went through this presentation. So again, if you have questions, type them in there, but we already had a few that kind of came in. So I'm going to start with some of the earlier ones that kind of came into the presentation. So first question, Bruce. Does the cookie consent pop-up count as intrusive interstitial?
No.
That's your classic thing, right? The opposite reaction to whatever it is you're saying.
So it actually depends upon the size of that pop-up. If it is common, it is like maybe the lower, 5-10% of the screen. That is not considered to be covering enough of the screen to be in the way of us being able to answer that particular question, right? The question is, will you consent? It's not the whole screen. So if it's only the small fraction at the bottom or perhaps at the top, that is not considered to be really a bad interstitial. So the answer to that question is usually no. Now, I have seen sites where that pop-up, their legal department decided to put all sorts of text in it. And it's almost like 2/3 of the screen for the do you accept cookies? And while legal may be very happy with that, Google will not be. So the answer to that question could be no. It very legitimately could be no. So the answer is use a small one, use it across the bottom, preferably, in which case you'll be okay.
Got it. All right, let's move along here. We got quite a few questions. We're going to try and get through as many as we can. So why am I seeing LCP issues for PDF uploads from mobile? What can I do to optimize PDFs for core web vital metrics?
I'm not sure you can. The largest contentful paint on a PDF, understand that the underlying code in a PDF is HTML. So if what you have is a lot of images and a large image and things like that, it just may take a while and you can still get around it. But you know, if the PDF has to fully load before it's shown, then that's a problem. I think you're going to have to focus on how to optimize PDFs. I think perhaps an important question would be, why are you loading PDFs instead of web pages? And in which case you can optimize the web page. You can point to the PDFs in even a directory that is blocked in robots.txt, and we'll see how that works.
Got it. Okay. All right, next question. Are decorative videos like short 5-second looping videos on home pages bad for core web vitals? Should we move away from decorative videos like these?
I don't know that you should. And by the way, a 5-second looping video doesn't mean it's small at all. Usually a hero banner kind of a thing is not a problem. I'd have to look at the video and see if what it's doing and how it's being treated. But generally, I would think that a looping video may not be a problem. I think an important question would be, is it annoying? I mean, 5 seconds is pretty short in the overall scheme of videos. The general rule is to not autoplay your videos anyhow. So it's something that we'd have to look at.
Got it. All right, we'll move on to the next one here. So in regards to no intrusive interstitials and the example of pop-ups being bad, does this include cookie warning pop-ups that we use on our site to be CCPA compliant? This pop-up prevents many aspects of the site from loading until the users accept the cookies.
So that's the same question,
right,
as the first, and it really depends upon what percentage of the screen you're consuming. So if you're consuming just a fraction of the screen and most of the screen is still there, it's not a problem.
Got it. Okay. Go on the next one. So can a user's internet speed affect the core web vitals? And if so, how does Google differentiate that so the site isn't negatively ranked as a result of this?
The answer is it is negatively ranked as a result of this. That's just the answer. The real world numbers, which are derived at the desktop browser of the visitor to your website, that's where it's captured. If in my case, the biggest problem I faced was that I have offices around the world. I'm in Tokyo. They're pretty fast. I'm in Sydney. They're pretty fast. I'm in Dubai. They're pretty fast. I'm in India. It's like watching grass grow. It is slow. Take it. And so, yes, I was impacted by it. Trust me, if you have users that are visiting your web page that are being impacted by slow internet services, then yes, it is going to negatively impact your scores. It's going to be seen as taking longer for that to occur.
Gotcha.
That's where CDNs may turn out to be a savior for you.
Gotcha. Okay. So trying to save time by converting images to newer formats, but WebP makes my larger images too blurry. Any tips on other formats that won't sacrifice quality for compression?
Really? So we use WebP. And by the way, there are plugins that determine, because when you connect, the browser is going to say, give me this page, and I support WebP. So there are plugins that automatically serve WebP instead of JPEGs, as an example. Is there another format? There's plenty of formats. There's the original format of the image. The problem is they're typically way too slow if you haven't compressed them. And we have years of software out on the market that can do compression and you can go 10%, 20, 30, 40, 50, and see where you're not actually fuzzy. But I have not heard, this is the first time I've heard where somebody had a fuzzy WebP image. I haven't seen nor heard of one. So maybe there's something bizarre with the image. Maybe you already had a compressed image and it was already being WebP'd and it just made it a little worse. Instead of go back to the original image and try that through WebP instead of a compressed image. That might change things. I don't know for sure, but I would run that experiment and see if it's really WebP that is messing up or WebP on top of a maximally compressed image. That might be the difference.
Right. And just for context, when we do the monthly Q&A call similar to this format, a lot of times we get questions that are specific to the person asking the question. And it's hard for us to answer because it always goes back to, well, it depends. We'd have to look at it and see what the issue is. But of course, yeah, please feel free to ask the questions, but we'll do our best. And of course, if you want to have us look at it, feel free to reach out to us and we'll see what we can do. All right, next question. I get very different page speed scores on web page test versus Google Page Speed Insights. Do you think Google Page Speed Insights / Lighthouse is the authority? Seems a bit off on what my actual page speed is.
Yes. I think the real problem, and as I said, I would use Google Analytics. That is the right way to look at absolute, as close as we can get to real numbers. Analytics is going to give you the better of all your numbers. Mm-hmm. Now, having said that, I think that the issue is improvement. So if you're using PageSpeed Insights and it said 17 and you move it to 50 and then you move it to 75, at least you see you're going in the right direction. But as I pointed out, each tool, when you look at the recommendations for what you should fix, each tool gives you different recommendations. And as a result, each tool has their own standard for what the speed is and all these different variables. So my recommendation is to run them all and improve the scores across the board. I think that's far more important than worrying about, is this one right or is that one right? Trend it. If it's improving constantly, if I have recommendations for repair and I do them constantly, you're eventually going to get there on everything. But I wouldn't just put all my eggs in any one basket.
All right, cool. So next question, you mentioned home pages with a large hero image. What do you do about these images?
We use WebP. We load them as best we can. We've experimented with preloads and things like that. It may be that you can't get around certain things. You might want to make them smaller. You might want to diminish the palette. You might want to make sure that you have a CDN that is actually serving it, that it's actually cached out and available. There's any number of things that you could do. If you go to our website, here's a good example for you. Go to bruceclay.com. Once it loads, and you'll see it loads pretty quick, pick a subpage and tell me how long it takes for that subpage to load. Now, of course, I don't want 500 people doing it at the same time, but fundamentally, we should be able to do that. And it loads pretty fast. So you can take any kind of complex page, any kind of large images, you can optimize it, you can use WebP, which we recommend, and you can get your speed down. You can get it down pretty good. So largest contentful paint is clearly a number. Largest content, any number, by the way, I said it, any number that is a real world number that comes out of Chrome, Lighthouse type things, any of those numbers those numbers are at the browser, which means it's sensitive to distance from your server. So unless you're using a CDN, you're not going to get a consistent speed from somebody in India, somewhere in the US. So you got to be careful about those, but logically it should load as fast. You should be able to get your site to load as fast as ours.
Okay. Next one here. Will accessibility scoring play a role in scoring? I've been battling accessibility resistance among project leads in my organization. I'd love one more argument to make all of our content accessible as well as responsive.
I'm not sure about accessibility. The question, I mean, you have different levels of things when you consider accessibility. ADA compliance and things like that are entirely different, and it relates to accessibility. Normally, the thing to remember is that if the only spider is the mobile spider, whatever the mobile spider sees is all that is indexed. So if you have more showing because you want to make it available to somebody on a desktop, understand it won't be indexed. Because if it isn't seen in a mobile browser, it is considered gone. The spider that Google sends out is the mobile spider. Now, having said that, there is a possibility you could get into a cloaking situation if you end up, I'm not going to show it because it's mobile, but I am going to show it to everybody on a desktop. We don't want to have so much of your code in that particular reformatting process that it causes problems. So we're going to have to be careful about that. That might actually be a look at it and see kind of a question rather than just a general one size fits all answer. We might have to see exactly what accessibility means in the context of the question.
Gotcha. Okay. So next question here. Does no buttons above the fold for FID include banners at the top to get email subscriptions?
If it is part of the web page, anything that requires or allows for interaction is part of first input delay.
Okay.
You see, Google doesn't know what the button's for. A button's a button. And so is it in milliseconds? How many milliseconds from the time the page loads until I can actually engage with the page? That is your FID. Now, typically, it loads fast. It's within the zone of acceptance. FID typically passes everything. But if you're having problems with it, then potentially you have CSS issues or JavaScript issues or loading issues elsewhere that's delayed it too much.
Got it. Okay. So next question here. The websites I am responsible for often have issues with CLS. We'll fix the issues one day and GSC shows no failing pages. Then the next week, all pages site-wide fail for CLS again. What are some items we should be looking at for that most effective CLS? Or that most effective CLS, sorry.
Okay. Well, it turns out that Mike has done a lot of research on CLS. So Mike, why don't you talk about some of the issues that would impact CLS and why I pass it this week and fail it next?
I mean, we've seen the same thing with CLS is very tricky, and you can fix it on Page Speed Insights or Lighthouse in Chrome Developer Tools. But then if the device that a user is using or the device that you're simulating changes, or they have a slightly different speed, maybe a slower network, that changes the way the browser does resource loading. Browsers have very complex resource loading formula, and it depends on when stuff gets rendered or painted onto the page, whether elements are going to be vulnerable to being shifted around. So it's a big problem and it's really difficult. But what we found is you can actually make it simple. what you want to do, in my recommendation, is to identify elements that are at risk for being shifted, which you can do in Lighthouse, or you can do by sending Google or analytics data, performance data to Google Analytics and running reports there. But you identify areas that are risks for shift, and then you tag them with a CSS class to hide them. Hide those elements until you know from experience and you know from tests that they'll be done shifting. For instance, a lot of times this will happen if you're using web fonts. Web fonts are super popular, but they take a while to download and be rendered onto the page. And when they are rendered onto the page, a lot of times that shifts elements around. So there's ways you can detect when those web fonts are ready to be loaded, and then you can unhide elements that are shifted, and that way you can work around these CLS penalties. So there's nothing that will do this off the shelf. There's no plugins that will do this. This is something that you'll have to do by hand or have a developer do. It's not the most difficult thing in the world, though. It's something that's definitely accessible, and it will make a big difference.
Cool. Alrighty, great answer. So let's move on to the next one here. It's actually, you mentioned fonts earlier there, Mike. Is it best to use Google Fonts?
Who wants to take this?
Go ahead, Mike.
Is it best to use Google Fonts? Well, it depends on what your business goals are. But if you can get away with it, not using Google Fonts and not using any web fonts at all is going to be the easiest for you to score well on LCP and CLS in particular. If you are going to use a web font, Google Fonts can be nice because they do serve them from very fast CDNs all around the world. But I'm not sure the question, I'm not sure compared to what. So Google Fonts versus system fonts. If you can get away with it, use system fonts. But if you're going to have to use web fonts, then Google Fonts are a good choice.
Gotcha. Cool. All right, next one. When did Google announce that they would be three separate signals, that they would be three separate signals rather than a collective Core Web Vital?
Oh,
Right.
I think that was about 2 months ago.
Yep, it was in one of their webmaster FAQs, and I can link to it in the chat here.
All right, great. Not available there. All right.
So I'm not sure everybody would see the chat, but yeah.
Yeah, we'll put it in the chat. That way people can see it. Perfect. All right, so next question here. On Google Page Insights, sorry, the question's kind of weird here. On Google Page Insights, get following insufficient first input delay FID data for this page, but this metric is optional for the Core Web Vitals assessment. Where can I get the score? Not sure
Get the score for which variable?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I understand that question.
I think I might understand it. Well, we can speak to the fact that FID, you won't be able to measure that in the lab, so it's not going to show up on Page Speed Insights. It's not optional necessarily, but it's just not something that's possible to be measured using an automated test. But the way you would get your actual FID measurements is to install, and Bruce alluded to this earlier, getting performance analytics in Google Analytics is going to be the best data. And the way you do that is you install this Google project called webvitals.js. You install that on your site and you configure it to send your performance data to Google Analytics, from where you can run reports. Google also provides an off-the-shelf report that will integrate with Google Analytics so that you can see a prefabricated report that way, and it's pretty valuable. And that's where you'll actually get live FID information from your real users on your site.
Yeah. All right, next one. Are all Core Web Vitals based on the full page or just what is in the viewport, or above the fold, probably?
Well, the viewport on a mobile device is 12,000 pixels high. 12,400 some odd pixels high. So it's a pretty big viewport. In many cases, it's a majority of the page. So The answer is yes. It could be page. It's a very big viewport. And that's because of the way the spider works. It doesn't really look at a viewport about what you're going to see on a mobile device. The viewport that Google uses is much larger. So, yeah, viewport. I think that's the best answer. Yeah, the whole viewport, but it's almost page length in many cases.
Okay. If we use the preloader library on each page, then will it be helpful to increase the LCP?
Yes.
So it's not a library, unfortunately. It's a pattern, and it's really just adding a loading screen to your page, and it will be helpful to any page that you add the loading screen to, but it does have to be specially crafted, and we couldn't really get into the technical details on this webinar. But if you carefully construct a loading page that matches, that works within the bounds of how Core Web Vitals is measured using browser performance APIs, then every page that it applies to, it will fix the LCP for that page.
As I mentioned earlier, a great amount of the Core Web Vitals really went to a level different from web development, what we think of as web development from years ago. I mean, if we're talking APIs and we're talking about restructuring and splitting up and compressing and a lot of things at the server or at a level of modification of the core templates and things like that, that's a lot of web core vitals. And Mike just alluded, yes, you can do it. But I think he used about half the words he used were not the kinds of things that a typical marketing person would say, oh, I know how to do that. This is complex stuff. You know, as Dylan, as you mentioned, we have SEOtraining.com. No problem. And we talk about Core Web Vitals as part of our course. But because of all these things, we're doing a deeper dive. And because of some of the programming things, we may yet do even a programming level deeper dive. So this is complex stuff. Just understand it. This is not the kind of thing that you just edit in WordPress and you magically have it. That is not going to be how this is solved. You really need to solve it. You can't afford the near-death experience, but this is not for the timid.
Okay. So how does an SEO, or I'm sorry, does an SEO need to be a developer to be able to do these optimizations?
I'm going to let Mike try to answer that because my answer is absolutely.
There are some things that you can do. There are a lot of things you can do that you don't have to be a developer for, particularly if you have, for instance, a WordPress site. So there's lots of plugins that will help you fix some of these things. For instance, one of the key things that you should do for sure is lazy load resources, particularly images. And there's lots of WordPress plugins that will help you lazy load. And then since we know, as Bruce discussed, improvements to your site for Core Web Vitals, they're per page and per metric. So any changes that you make will incrementally improve your site. So if you install one of these plugins and fix lazy loading, that might get you some of your pages, a section of your site, into the green on LCP, for example. But you know, to get over if you want to be green across your origin and you have a pretty complex site, you have an old site with lots of pages, you're probably going to need a developer to get you over the hump. And we do have resources and some stuff that'll be coming out that will help your developer to make that as painless as possible. We definitely have some tips and techniques for that. And I did want to just mention a second ago when the person asked about the preloader library, I will say there isn't currently a library that can help you with preloading. It is entirely possible to create a WordPress plugin that would create a preloader experience for your site and sort of maybe give you some customization options and stuff like that. And we've talked about doing that, but it's not something that we have in the pipeline at the moment. And I don't know of anybody else that's doing it yet.
Okay. All right, next question. What is a good way to test your time to first byte around the world?
Key CDN has a really good tool that will do that, and I can link to that in the chat if give me a couple seconds to look it up.
Okay, yeah, we'll put that in the chat. Alrighty, we'll have that as a resource. All right, next one. One of the old tried and true methods of online marketing is providing a landing page with some form of CTA above the fold. Are you suggesting otherwise when considering FID?
No, I don't think we're not trying to change your business. Most FID works fine. If you have a landing page, one of the historic ways of doing a landing page is to keep it short, not distract the user from the purpose of the landing page, which is usually fill in the form. So if a page is that small, you're probably not going to have an FID problem. You're not doing complex things. You're not dynamically loading a lot of stuff on a landing page. And so usually that won't be a big problem. I think that if your landing page is part of your website and it's a complex, long page and there's all sorts of convincing going on, and it takes a while for that page to load, then maybe FID will be a little bit slower. But as we mentioned, FID is typically not a problem. If it is a problem, you might have to look at it.
Okay. Alrighty, moving on. Can you specifically speak to how Bruce Clay could fix our company's issues? We have severe issues with CLS, LCP, and speed. Well, I mean, obviously, Bruce, you can speak to that, but I'll just comment first is that we have this great membership program called SEOtraining.com that you should go to. It's on the screen right there. And this is kind of the resources we have available to you. But there's also other more specific hands-on stuff that we can do for you at bruceclay.com. You go there, we have teams here that can look at your website. I'm not saying we're going to do that for free, but we do have these resources available to you. But anyway, Bruce, anything else to comment?
And we offer full services, everything from audits to retainers to blocks of time. We cover a great many SEO services. We're an agency. We happen to have a training component. We happen to have a tool component. We happen to have been around for a long time. And we've seen a lot of things. So that helps our ability to answer questions and to solve problems and things like that. That's why we're an agency. So yes, we're an agency. You can fill out a form at the bottom of any page on bruceclay.com and we'll get back to you.
Got it. All righty, so let's move on to the next one here. We got some time left, but we're going to try and get to just a few more before we wrap everything up. All right. What about time to fill in a form? We have a form that takes a bit to do a lookup on one field to present data based on input from an earlier field. Will Google detect this?
I don't think Google is at that level. I mean, typically you're changing data within a page, within a form. That's not an input delay.
Yeah.
So I don't think that matters. Now, if what's happening is you're seeing a cumulative layout shift because you're pulling in data and expanding the form and moving things, I don't know if that necessarily would pose a problem. That's something that we might have to look at because remember, CLS is in 5-second sliding windows, but chances are it's under 5 seconds. It's probably under the threshold. If you're just grabbing data, it shows up. You're probably not, I don't think you're going to see a big problem. Mike, do you think?
Yeah, no, I think, and I can definitely, and Google understands why you might be concerned about that. So they make this really clear. It's from the time, technically, when the event happens, the way you construct these as a programmer is an event happens and it fires a quote unquote callback function. The FID only refers to how long it takes until that callback function starts to run. So if the callback function takes a long time to run, it can take 10 seconds to run. You're not penalized for all of that. You're just penalized for if the browser is not able to start calling that function right away. So you don't have to worry about that.
Okay.
Did I mention that Web Core Vitals can be moderately technical? I just want to make sure I had mentioned that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, next one. Sounds like the bottom line is that the little guy is in hot water unless he can afford to hire a savvy developer. Is that correct?
Yeah. It'd be great to say, no, there's plugins for everything. Everybody, in general, everybody can improve things themselves by developing a site with this in mind when it was built. There are still companies out there, by the way, this annoys me. There are still companies out there that are hiring people to build them new websites and not specifying that the new website has to be compliant with green on all the core web vital numbers. They're not even asking the developer to build something that is green for these variables. So yes, if you have a site, it's old, it hasn't been brought up to speed, that's your burden. You can, Google looks at the, by the way, everybody understands that Google is in the business of making money. Let's just accept that. And they make money on pay-per-click. They don't make money on organic, but they need organic because Google cannot be an expert on a billion different topics, right? People ask questions, they want the right answer. The search engine can't answer it themselves, so they need websites that can answer it. They want to improve the overall quality of those results. No doubt, they want to do that. But assuming, and this is futures research, assuming that every search engine on the planet becomes equally competent at providing the right answer, user experience now becomes the tiebreaker. And Google knows that. And they're really leaning on user experience as a requirement so that people using Google will have a good experience when they get the results. And you don't have a choice. And if you have a bad user experience, why should Google give you free traffic? It's the price you pay to get the traffic. And if you don't want to pay the price, you don't get the traffic. One of my sayings that I use all the time, don't be surprised by the results you don't get for the work you didn't do. That's a pretty straightforward statement. Yes, you're right. Little guys, it's tough. You can do a lot of this. There's a lot of information out there. We have a lot of information in SEO training, and it gets deeper. Can you hire somebody to do it? Yes. Can you hire people to help you? Yes. We don't know how good everybody is. I'm pretty sure not everybody's been doing as much as we have. Mike has been dedicated to this for what, half your life now? It seems like.
Yeah.
100% of his time. That's what he does. And not every agency can even afford that, let alone a website. You can't develop that kind of skill internally. You can't afford to pay for somebody to be just sitting there for months figuring this stuff out. You almost have to use an agency if you really want to get at the top of it. But unfortunately, that's the way it is. And we can't solve it. We can just make it better. And that's where we're at. And yeah, it may mean that you have to have an agency participating in order to get this to work the way you want it to work.
Got it. All right, moving on. If your target is region-based, does it matter to Google if LCP and FID on the other side of the world needs improvement?
Yeah, because they don't gather their numbers by region or even country. It's the total user base loading your website. So let's imagine I want to hurt your scores. All I have to do is find the slowest spot on the entire planet and have a whole bunch of people sit there and just keep loading your homepage. That's the way it could work. I wouldn't recommend it. I wouldn't consider it ethical. I wouldn't do it. But understand that, yeah, it's going to be impacted by people outside of that region.
Okay. All right. Again, it's been about an hour and a half. We'll do a few more questions, and just to make the most use of our time here, because we have a lot that we still didn't get to, but we'll just get a few more in. For largest contentful paint, would it be advisable to add a large screen image but low KB preloaded image that is a mere background image? This would serve no real purpose other than lowering LCP time.
Well, Mike,
I'm sorry.
that's something we discussed.
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
Yeah, for largest contentful paint, would it be advisable to add a large screen image but low KB preloaded image that is mere background image? This would serve no real purpose other than lowering LCP time.
You should do whatever makes sense for your brand. You shouldn't do things for no purpose than to improve LCP time. But if you're going to load a visible background image that is authentic to your brand, and it can also help you improve your LCP time. I mean, the fact is you have to play the game of structuring your code to get credit for LCP and all core web vitals. But you shouldn't do things, for instance, technically, you could load a image above the fold that was invisible, and you could get a really fast LCP time that way. That's interesting to note just because it sort of shows you the boundaries of what's required to get a fast LCP, but we would consider that black hat. So anything that you do, you should, for instance, you could, one thing that you can do is not load your images from an external server, even your own server, but you can actually structure your code so that it loads what's called inline right in the root HTML document using what's called a data URI. Now, I understand this is super technical and whatever, but just restructuring your code so that it's faster, you have to play that game to get credit for a fast LCP. So that's something that you need to look at. And you might want to redo your whole above the fold experience so that it emphasizes a large background image. And as long as that's authentic to your brand and it's serving a business need, and at the same time, it's structured your code in such a way that you get a LCP load time of under 2.5 seconds, then it's symbiotic. Your goals are dovetailing.
Okay. So what suggestions do you have for improving core web vitals with WordPress?
Well, most of the WordPress, as Mike mentioned, there's plenty of plugins. I would look at the plugins and I would try them and make sure they're compatible with the operation of your templates and your WordPress environment. But you can come 80% of the way just with some plugins. Just install them and let them fix things for you. I wouldn't, certainly on WordPress, I would do the plugins before I do anything else. Now, one of the things to understand is some of the plugins are going to fix things and some of the plugins are going to be band-aids or disguise things. You may still need to go in after the fact and re-optimize the layout of your pages to get the full benefit. Or you may need to restructure images or some of the things like Mike has been discussing. Those kinds of things you could still do even with all the plugins. But you should be able, an average person should be able, in a WordPress world, to do significant benefit for speed and core web vitals with plugins. Yeah. Now, our website happens to be WordPress. And as I mentioned earlier, you can go to our site, you can see how fast it is. And we're green on all the lab results. And we're 98 to 100 on all of the speed scores. And you can do quite a bit of work and you can get it really, really good and fast. And then you can play with CDNs to get the speed up around the world. And that's where we're at right now. That's what Mike's doing. We got all this stuff. You can improve WordPress quite a bit. The average user can improve their own WordPress by using the right plugins.
Okay. All right. Got about 2 or 3 more questions and then we're going to wrap up. So we have here is, should I even bother trying to get my desktop core web vitals better, or is it better to just focus on mobile?
But yes, it's better to focus on mobile, but that doesn't mean that down the road, Google won't throw back in desktop. The spider's mobile, but it may be that the overall quality and the ratings for some of these things might be hybrid desktop and mobile. We don't know what Google's going to do. Now, if 90%, remember the gist of this is user experience. We want to improve the user experience. And if 90% of your users, 80%, 70%, half of your users are on a desktop, yeah, you want to benefit them. Think users. You know, this isn't only about search. Search, the stuff we're focused on, happens to be for rankings so we can get more users to us. But the user experience is really what the emphasis is here. So assuming that you do both, that's what we're focused on, I'd say, yeah, do both.
Okay.
Just remember, the spider is the mobile spider. So you can't ignore that.
Okay. How is local affected by core web vitals?
Just web pages.
Mm.
I don't think, Google doesn't care about local. Now, if it turns out that 100% of your visitors are within 25 miles, well, then you're probably going to perform moderately well if your server's there. So you might benefit if you can keep your universe of users close to your server, just for performance purposes. That might help. But otherwise, Google doesn't care. A web page is a web page is a web page. They're going to get numbers. They're going to run the lab. They're going to pull it in for browsers, and that's the way it's going to be. Now, having said that, Google is going to have a little difficulty because you do not have a high enough volume, usually within a region, within a local region, for the real world numbers to ever reach a statistically valid threshold. Google looks at 28 days, but you may not have a very high representative sample in 4 weeks. And so you have these suspect periods where you may not have the traffic to get all your numbers. But I don't think Google cares if you're local or not.
Okay. All right, let's do another one. Would a CDN be considered overkill when dealing with local small businesses?
Depends. If you're having problems getting the speed from your, because you don't know necessarily where your servers are located in many cases. They may not even be in your state. There's one thing for you to operate a business and cater to a neighborhood, but you may have a server that's located on the other side of the continent. So maybe. I wouldn't worry. You just have to understand your CDN has a tendency to make the pages in closer proximity to the person doing the search. So in many cases, that might serve you, especially if you have very large images and you're on a shared server. A shared server, there could be 500 websites on that same server, right? And as was mentioned earlier, time to first byte is critical, in which case time to first byte may suffer if you're on a shared server versus a dedicated server, whereas a CDN can finesse that, especially for images.
Okay. All right. Which plugins would you recommend for WordPress? I swear that's a real question, Bruce. It's not a softball setup for you.
I'm going to let Mike have it.
So we're still experimenting with plugins, so I'm not sure that I want to recommend any. There are a lot of performance plugins out there that you might have seen, like WP Rocket and such. And I think it pays, and it depends on how your site is configured and constructed, whether it will work for you. So try them. Any of these that like can automatically convert images to WebP and do lazy loading and stuff. Those will probably have a clear benefit, but do be clear when you test them that you're looking at the right things. So don't pay too much attention to the top line page speed insight score, the so-called speed score. Really zero in on LCP and CLS, and then also total blocking time, which is a proxy for first input delay. So look at those three especially, but particularly LCP and CLS. And if it doesn't improve those, then that plugin is probably not working for you. It's public knowledge, so it's not like we can hide things necessarily, but right now we're experimenting with one that's got a plugin that's gotten a lot of visibility in the last few months called NitroPack. And I'd say the jury is still out a little bit on it, on the various trade-offs, but it can do some pretty impressive things for some sites. Some sites it won't do anything for, and it actually will hurt you. You should definitely check to see if your CLS has gotten out of control if you try it. But if you do try it, let us know what you think and see how it works for you. We're still in the evaluation phase ourselves.
And that's at nitropack.io, in case you want to look it up.
Gotcha.
Are we at time?
Almost. I just have one more comment that I wanted to throw out there, Bruce. This came in from someone named Lori. I just want to make sure you saw it. They wanted to say, I want to say thank you to Bruce because you put out such good content on how to build a ranking website when I graduated from graphic design school and wanted to start building sites. I got a great foundation and have been able to create websites that rank fast on Google. So just wanted to make sure you saw that, Bruce. So we have a lot of people out there that we've helped in the past, and we're very, very grateful for all the people that tuned in today. And we'd love for you guys to be members in our SEO training membership program. And we thank you all for the questions. Again, we do these on a monthly basis. This is for, kind of outside of the membership program so that we can get, more people to know about what we're offering. But once you become part of the membership program, we do this on a monthly basis, and you could easily ask Bruce more questions like this, and we can do more hands-on tweaking for your websites and kind of help with the page experience update. So again, thank you guys, everybody. Be sure to go to SEOtraining.com, use that promo code BruceClay2021, get $300 off your membership fee. And then you can also reach out to us at bruceclay.com, and we're here to answer your SEO questions there and help improve your website. So thank you again, Bruce, for all of your help and wisdom. And thank you, Mike, for coming in and assisting on some more of the technical information. And I hope you all have a good rest of your day. We'll be reposting this tomorrow. You guys can watch it again then. So we'll see you guys soon. Thank you again, and have a good rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.